Senator Johnson, always good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Well, Sean, thanks for having me on.
All right, before I get to the big, beautiful bill, your analysis of it, the report that you put out, I just want to, big day for the president over there in the Netherlands, both the G7 getting commitments from NATO and revealing these additional reports from Israel on the battle damage assessment that was done. What are your thoughts on both?
Well, first of all, I completely support President Trump's position that Iran can never be a nuclear power. The series of events starting with basically, I'm sure, Iran giving Hamas the green light to butcher Israelis on October 7th. That led to just a series of events of Hamas being degraded, if not destroyed, then Hezbollah, the Houthis, then Iran stupidly fired missiles directly from Iran into Israel, which certainly prompted Israel to take out their air defense system. So Iran was in a very weakened state. Whether there was an assessment they were going to create a bomb within a week, or 2 weeks, or 3 months, or a year, we had the opportunity to take that capability out. I hope we did. It might take some time in terms of full assessment. Did they move some of that nuclear material? We just really don't know at this point in time. It sounds like the military is very confident that we obliterated the site, but again, did they have some other secret site that nobody knows about? Again, I don't know. But I think the world's a safer place because of it. Completely support President Trump's decision to do so. I was with him in the Oval Office a couple of days ago, and first thing I told him is I said, "Listen, you continue to be in my prayers, and this is one of the reasons. I value you as president. Those are tough decisions to make. And I think you made the right one."
Yep, so I agree, and I think this NATO commitment today, look, to me, is a big deal, just from the sense that everyone in Washington, on the elitist side, has got their hand wringing. Oh, you can't treat NATO this way. And it's like, are we supposed to just be picking up the tab for these guys? And yet here we go, President Trump hammering it for 10 years now that NATO needs to actually not just pick up more of the tab, but actually follow through on the commitments that they themselves made. And now we're seeing it finally.
Well, I was with an administration official a couple of days ago as well. And I don't want to name him because I don't want to get the numbers wrong, but basically they're laying out, you take a look at what we've spent on defense of the world versus what other people haven't spent, pretty well explains our deficit. Again, I've got to check those numbers, but it was well into the 20 trillions of dollars. And that's basically true. We've paid a heavy price here in America for defending the world. And listen, we are the world's superpower. I think that does put extra burden on us, keep the shipping lanes open, that type of thing. But that's something our allies have to recognize as President Trump is trying to negotiate trade deals, as he's trying to get them to carry more of the burden of their own defense. It's a very legitimate point to make. And it's one I hadn't heard made, and so I thought it was pretty unique and interesting.
It is. Well, you bringing up the deficit is a perfect segue into what I really wanted to get into today with, which is the big, beautiful bill, the status of it, your concerns. You guys, your office issued a really compelling report. We're going to put the links in the show notes. So if anyone wants to go back and see what Senator Johnson's team put together, let's just start with this. You lay out some really compelling stuff in graphic ways. Like, anyone with eyes can look at what you guys put out on these charts to show what our spending has been, what it will be, and what the drivers of it are. So I just want to start with this. You make a very compelling case about where we've gone, particularly since COVID. How has that been received among your colleagues on the Republican side?
Well, let me first state, I wrote that report 100% myself. All the charts, I do have people that do the charts, but I give them the information, the data. I did the spreadsheets that did the projections on different growth rates, that type of thing. So in case there's anything wrong, I don't want my staff being blamed for that. This is on me.
This is what happens when you actually have a businessman in the Senate.
And an account,
That's true.
So the most important numbers in that report, it's 30 pages, is focusing on the 10-year projected deficits. We can get so wrapped up in current law, current policy. People can use it in a very misleading fashion. I think they do, whether they intend to or not. It just gets so confusing. We talk about all these CBO scores. I'm not a real big fan of the CBO, but you have to have some kind of baseline. So you start with the CBO's 10-year baseline that they issued in January of this year. and they project a deficit from 2025 to 2034, that 10-year period, of $21.1 trillion. So back up. The 7 years prior to COVID, our average deficit was $660 billion. Still too high, but $660 billion. Then we had COVID, bipartisan blowout and spending, a deficit of $3.1 trillion. Now, a rational administration, a sane president, and Democrats in Congress would have reduced spending and deficits back to that pre-pandemic level, right? They didn't do that. We went from $4.4 trillion of spending in 2019 up to 6.5 the year of the pandemic, and average 6.5 for the next 5 years. This year we'll spend over $7 trillion. Next year, 7.3. So that's a 58% increase. And again, no American family would do that. If they had an illness, they had to borrow $50,000 to pay for medical bills. If the family member got well, you wouldn't keep borrowing $50,000 spent at that level. But that's what the federal government did. So Biden averaged, okay, from $660 billion prior to the pandemic, till 4 years after, under the Biden administration, we averaged deficits of $1.9 trillion.
So it's double.
More, it's triple. It's basically triple. 660 to 1.9, it's triple.
Oh, 1.9, I'm sorry. This is why I didn't take math in college, sorry.
That's fine. I'm an accountant. I'm here to check you. So anyway, 1.9. So you would think a Republican administration, Republican Congress would want to really address that and bring those down to a reasonable pre-pandemic level, both spending and deficits. Again, the CBO baseline is $21.1 trillion, $2.1 trillion per year. The CBO score on the One Big Beautiful Bill puts that at 24.1. Now you can quibble, so $2.4 trillion deficits average per year. Now you can quibble that they base that on a 1.8 or 1.8% growth, but for the last 25 years we've only grown on average 2.21%. So how realistic is to maintain 3% or higher? So anyway.
But just, can I stop you on that point? Because in your report, you do show
let me finish this.
Yeah.
So 21.1 trillion, 2.1 average to 24.1. The White House's memo from June 7th, I think it was, where they lay out their scenario, their score of their One Big Beautiful Bill, they put total deficit at $18.6 trillion. So an average deficit of 18.6 per year, just under the 1.9 trillion. So again, I lay out different scenarios, what it's going to actually take, what level of pre-pandemic spending, they're all reasonable, to even just start bending the deficit curve down. But that's kind of what that report's all about.
In the report, you show in the 90s, we did exceed 3% growth. To me, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like even if we get there, to your point, we still have a massive deficit, and that's just masking a spending problem.
Right. I mean, I put in there a scenario of 3% growth. And it somewhat flattens out that curve, but you're still averaging over $2 trillion per year, right around $2 trillion per year. 4% growth, now you start bending the deficit curve down. But again, we haven't had 4% growth since the 1960s, over a decade. And one of the things I point out in that report is Reinhardt and Rogoff wrote a book, This Time Is Different, basically saying, no, it's not. And they just lay out nation after nation that got themselves into this huge debt to GDP problem. Once you hit 90% external debt to GDP, you really are impacting growth. Is that what's been happening? Because we had excess 4% growth during the 60s, probably Kennedy's tax cuts. Then we averaged, I think, 3.2 for the rest of the decade. Now we've been averaging 2.21%. We went from Obama when I came into Congress in 2011, we were $14 trillion in debt, and we were paying a couple $100 billion a year in interest. Now we're paying over $1 trillion a year in interest. And again, the more that debt ramps up, the more creditors look at America and say, we'll loan you money, but not at that rate. And that's what's happening. Okay, they're not loaning us long anymore. It's shorter term T-bills. We have to refinance. We have to refinance $9 trillion this year of the $37 trillion debt. We're turning over probably lower price debt for higher interest rate debt. Again, that all ends up being really complicated as well. But again, we just have a lot of risk in terms of higher interest rates, higher interest expense, bigger deficits. And again, as much, and I told the president I'd be more positive about this. I basically agree with the House bill. We extend current tax law. We take an automatic tax increase off the table. We avoided default. We provide border funding, greater defense, because Democrats aren't going to do appropriations. So we got to make sure we have enough defense spending. Where I quibble with them is they picked $1.5 trillion of spending reduction out of the air. It's just not, it doesn't meet the moment. It's just completely inadequate. We increased spending more than $2 trillion in 1 year. We're not even reducing spending by that amount over 10. So the spending increase was an order of magnitude larger than what we're laying in terms of spending reduction. It's just not adequate.
Oh, okay. So, and again, I just want to run through this quickly because there's a lot to get to. Go back to what I asked. This is not debatable. What you laid out in this report are facts and figures under different scenarios. Here's the growth. This is what it gets you. You literally have a chart for everything. Here's the CBO. Here's the White House score. Here's the joint tax, right? This gets back to the question I asked you. When you show this to your colleagues, are they in denial of the problem or the solution?
They don't look at it. I've sent out the 30-page report to everybody I know because I hear questions in the conference yesterday. Well, what would happen if we have 3% growth? Secretary Besson kind of in his head kind of went through and said it would be about $4 trillion. By the way, he was right. In my report, it shows about 3.8. But if you would have read my report, you wouldn't even had to ask that question. So, Sean, I've been beating my head against the wall, banging this drum since my first article in the Wall Street Journal about pre-pandemic levels of spending. It's been largely ignored by everybody. They're not willing to take the second step in solving a problem. I think everybody acknowledges we've got a problem, but then they immediately deny the extent of it. So they're not willing to properly define it. The way the problem has been defined here in Congress is the only numbers that matter are 218 and 50.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
No. The numbers that matter are $1.9 trillion a year deficit, going up to 2.1 and 2.5, up to 2.8 and 9, based on these different scenarios.
It's funny. I got this quote from a meeting that you had on August 1st, 2013, during a White House meeting with Obama. And this is what I have. You tell me if I'm right. President Obama says to you, Ron, we can't show the American public numbers that big. If we do, I should do it in an Obama voice. If we do, they'll get scared and give up hope. Besides, Ron, we can't do all the work. We have to leave some for future presidents and future Congresses. I'm blown away. This is 11, almost 12 years ago. And the president of the United States says, we can't tell the American people we're this screwed, and let's leave some of the problem for others.
And of course, we're $20 trillion further in debt. Our deficits are much larger. Back then, the interest was $221 billion a year. Now it's over $1 trillion. So when I met with the president of the White House on Monday, that's the thing I gave him. I gave him that picture of myself, Kelly Ayotte, and Bob Corker with that quote. I think he got the point I was trying to make is this is no time to shy away from describing to the American public, this is the hole we have dug ourselves. What we are doing, mortgaging our children's future, is unconscionable. It is immoral. We have to face up to that reality, especially us old folks. The theft, the intergenerational theft that has been going on from the old taking from the young, it can't go on. This has to stop. If I were a young person, I'd be so PO'd at us oldsters.
Yeah. It's funny. In the chart, there's this one little blip that you point out. You literally have an arrow that says Tea Party.
Right.
What did the Tea Party do well? Because it was during Obama. We now have all of Republicans controlling Congress. That was Obama. What did the Tea Party do well then that we could do now?
We were obstinate. So little history, Bush averaged $250 billion a year deficits during his entire 8 years. Then Obama came in and averaged $1.27 trillion in his first term. That sparked the Tea Party. I'm part of the Tea Party. We came in and we said, we're going to shut the government down. Now, it was divided government, so Obama had to work with us. So we put the brakes on things. We literally, Obama went from $3 trillion in spending the last year of Bush to 3.5. If you remember the big, beautiful stimulus bill, right? Didn't really purchase infrastructure. But he took it from 3 trillion to 3.5. We held spending flat for 5 years at 3.5 trillion. So again, so in his second term, Obama averaged deficits of $550 billion. We literally reduced that deficit spending by about $800 billion just by putting pressure, being obstinate, digging our heels and say, we're not going to fund government. We're not going to sign those appropriation bills. This is insane. It has to stop. Then, Trump came into office, he had divided government. He had to deal with Democrats. So those deficits started inching up. But again, for 7 years prior to the pandemic, $660 billion. Last 4 years, 1.9, and we're projected to go over 2 trillion as far as the eye can see. This, again, it's unsustainable. So my role in this process is just forcing everybody to acknowledge that reality. First step in solving a problem, admit you have it. Second step, properly define it. Then you start doing root cause analysis before you ever hop on solutions. Our problem is we're doing it the same old way.
Yeah.
You bundle up into big bill. You put in there must-pass things that must pass. To take an automatic tax increase off the table, avoid a default, and then you still don't do the hard things. This is probably the only time in our lifetime we have the leverage to make the big spenders dial it back, and we're just not. We're going to dissipate all of our leverage in the one big beautiful bill over the big spenders. We'll have no leverage back. And that's my sticking point, is I realize this is hard. I understand and I sympathize with the difficult nature that the president's faced with, that the speaker, that Leader Thune is faced with. But they have to understand that I can't give up all the leverage.
We can't
We either accomplish this or we got to retain some leverage.
I agree. So Leader Thune wants to start a vote-a-rama tomorrow and through the weekend. One, where are you on the vote? And two, do you think this thing passes the Senate?
Well, what I'm doing is, I'm actually preparing for it. So this is just a bullet point sheet of all the elements of the bill that have a JCT or a CBO score. We don't have it yet. We don't know what the bill is yet. Went through the bird bath. Committees are kind of reworking their wording, try and get some elements that the parliamentarian kicked out. But I have this for Senate Finance, but I don't have this on all the other committees. So I don't know which individual element is in the bill and how much it scores. So again, I'm sorry, I'm going to insist that I have this information, that I can do these sheets. Then I'm also going to insist that our conference goes through every one of these elements that has a score and discusses it. I mean, should we really keep this in here? I mean, should we really be, when we're $37 trillion in debt and projecting deficits in excess of $2 trillion, should we be cutting taxes more? Again, I don't want to increase tax. I'm happy to just extend the current tax law. I mean, if we would have been smart enough in 2017, the current tax law would have been permanent.
Yeah.
We would have actually found some savings, paid for permanence, but we didn't do that. Okay, let's not make the same mistake. So now, because we have Chairman Crapo, smart guy, said, hey, let's just use current policy. We don't have to pay for it. We can make it permanent. So I'm happy to do that because we would have done that in 2017. But what about all the new tax cuts? And listen, I appreciate that President Trump is focused on the working men and women of this country. But in addition to what he's promised, there's a whole lot of more what they call Senate and House priorities. That's what all these little red things are here, So we should go through this. Do we really increase deficit $18 billion for that person's wish list? 17 billion, 17 billion, 16 billion, 14 billion. This is real money. We need to go through each one of these lines, have the discussion in the conference, have the person who wants this, who got it inserted. Nobody ever took a vote on this stuff yet. This got inserted by leadership and committee chairs, working with members, go, hey, I really want this, insert it. That's why we're $37 trillion in debt. That completely dysfunctional, completely undemocratic process. I'm going to force this into transparency and a more democratic process. What are we going to leave in? What are we going to take out? That's how we have to do this, just in our conference. Then we'll have a bill that we can put on the floor, and kind of depends on how things shake out in the conference, whether I vote to proceed on that bill or not.
I got to be honest, I'm speechless. It just blows my mind that this is where we are. And it blows my mind when I read these stories about some of your colleagues that are like, I don't know if we can enact cuts to public broadcasting. I'm like, dude, then why are you there? In the last 30 seconds that we have, if you had to look at your crystal ball and to say Sunday night, I know the president wants to get this done before July 4th, but in 30 seconds or less, where do you think we are Sunday night?
Well, hopefully we're locked behind a door, and we're going through this line by line. What should go in, what should go out on the democratic process. Okay, colleagues, let's vote on this stuff. Rather than just have this shoved down our throats, let's discuss each one of these elements. We haven't done that. We've discussed things in general. Crapo's been good on finance of kind of letting us look at these things. But again, now we're down to crunch time. Now we've actually got a bill that's being assembled with individual elements, individual scores. Let's go through that. Again, I don't see us getting that done. Not this week. Maybe if we, get the information, get the scores, have leadership committed to, again, locking us in a room, going through an organized process, discussing, debating each one of these elements, and then voting. I mean, should we do this or not? Again, we've gone through the bird bath. Maybe we'll call this the Ron's rinse.
We need Ron's rinse. Senator Johnson, I can't tell you how much I and frankly the American people and the next generation of Americans owe you a debt of gratitude for fighting this fight. The easy answer in Washington is to roll over and do nothing. Thanks for explaining what's at stake to us. Thanks for your report. I hope people take a look at this report and the charts. They speak for themselves. Keep up the good fight, sir.
Well, let me also put in a plug for President Trump. God bless him. I'm seeing him in the Oval Office as he's kind of wordsmithing his announcement on the ceasefire. I mean, there's a man of steel. He truly is. I cannot, again, I don't want to be a problem child. He's got a tough job. I don't want to make it more difficult. I want to be totally supportive of him. He wanted the Senate to make the bill better. I want to make it a lot better.
Good.
So we put ourselves on a path, and he would like to see that too. It's how do we get the votes? Well,
all right. Thank you, sir.
It's transparency. Thank you for having me on.
Appreciate it. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.